Blog Talk Radio.
All right, everybody. Wednesday night, 8 p.m. Central Standard Time, 6 p.m. here on the west coast of California, and you are listening to IHWE Radio. My name is Michael McCurdy. I am the host of this show. I am the author of Encyclopedia WCCW, and tonight I'm flying solo. David's taking the night off because tonight we have a special episode lined up for you. We are doing a Portland wrestling tribute show, and I'm being joined by, in my opinion, some of the best historians to talk about the Pacific Northwest Territory, specifically Portland. We are being joined tonight by a man who is a 16-year veteran in the Pacific Northwest. He's done ring announcing, commentary. He's worked for Portland Wrestling, West Coast Wrestling Connection, Power Pit Pro Wrestling. He's worked for Big Time Wrestling in Newark. He's been a guest on this show before. Joe Souza is joining us tonight. Joe, welcome to IHWE Radio.
Mike, a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you for joining us. And our next guest, he is a noted historian, the editor and founder of Ring Around the Northwest newsletter, which ran for, I believe, 30 years. Still currently running at this time, I believe. He is joining us tonight, Mr. Mike Rogers. Mike, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Mike. I'm happy to be on your show.
And last but not least, another noted historian. As I said, we definitely have a great panel tonight. He is one half of the Suicide Kings tag team and a historian of the Portland Territory, as well as, I believe, a historian in the career of the late Bruiser Brody, one of his specialties there, Mr. Matt Farmer. Matt, thanks for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me, Mike. Appreciate it.
All right, guys. Anyways, as I said, we are going to talk about Portland wrestling tonight. A lot of names came through there, names such as Roddy Piper, Buddy Rose, Ed Wiskowski, better known to some people as Colonel De Beers, and many, many more. And we're going to start off tonight with a little brief history, thanks to Mike Rogers, of the Portland Territory to kind of catch everybody up, let them know what was going on. Mike, if you wouldn't mind, kind of give us a little history of the Portland Territory before we start.
Well, Portland has a long history, and I think we go back to about the 1920s when a wrestler by the name of Ted Thigh was promoting, and he kind of alternated his time between Portland and Australia, and he hired Herb Owen, Don Owen's father, to work with him, and at one point Ted Thigh went to Australia, and Herb just kind of stole the territory from him. Really, he put his name on the license, and Oregon had a long-standing rule or law that there could only be one promoter in the area, and then that promoter became Herb Owen, and it went on through the Owen family from that point on. Don Owen and Elton Owen, I think, came into power probably, Matt, around the late 40s, do you think?
40s and 50s, yeah.
Yeah, right about that time, I think Herb kind of faded out and Don and Elton took over. And for a while, the Portland promotion was a light heavyweight. So some of the lighter wrestlers were in the area. And they also had a promotion for a while. They would come in kind of haphazardly. There was a heavyweight promotion in Portland as well. But since they were different weights, I don't think that rule really came into effect. So that for a short time during the late 40s, early 50s, there was two promotions. But Owen continued. If there was a war, the Owens family won the war and slowly evolved into heavyweights as well as light heavyweights. And in the late 50s, around 1957, I know they got TV around 1953, but around the late 50s, a lot of names that really were familiar and long-lasting names, Tony Bourne and Ed Francis, Tito Carrion, and quite a few others, Pepper Martin, Billy White Wolf, they came to work, and I think from that point on, it really picked up. It was strong every decade. It was strong. The 50s, 60s, you have Tony Bourne and Lonnie Main as the prime wrestlers of that decade. The 70s, Buddy Rose and Roddy Piper, Dutch Savage and Bull Ramos in the early 70s. You move up into the 80s, and Rose and Wiskowski were around. Piper, the Sheep Herders, Rip Oliver, Billy Jack. In the mid-'80s, it kind of died a little bit, and then the Grappler came back came into the booking position in about 1987, and it ran pretty strong through the rest of the time until they lost their TV in 91, 92. I'm not sure if that's the quick roundup that you're looking for.
That would definitely be the quick roundup we were looking for.
Or the long roundup that you were looking for.
Just from the brief research I've done, I didn't realize myself just how far back the Portland territory went. I thought it started in like the 50s or 60s. I didn't realize it went back to the 1920s, as you said. So, I mean, for me, I'm learning some things already on here, and I'm hoping our listeners will as also.
Well,
but before we get yes.
Thing that I'll add, when I was in college, I went through the paper and the microfilm, and I started at Current Times from the Salem and Eugene paper, and I went back, and it went back through the Oregonian and everything. And in 1948, the microfilms turned, and so to read the paper, I would have to turn sideways, and that's when I stopped. So my expertise stops at 1948. I know Matt goes back a lot farther, and Matt can give you a better idea of it may well even go back farther than the 20s.
You know, as far as Herb Owen goes back to the 20s, but before that, I mean, with Ted Dye, I mean, you could trace it back to when Frank Gotch was barnstorming in the area, you know. And actually, Jack Curley was out here, the famed Jack Curley, who everybody knows as a New York promoter, or, you know, he was probably the biggest promoter in the teens. He was a promoter out here in the teens, also in the early 1900s. So it's got a long, long history.
Would you like to add anything to this little history lesson, Joe?
Oh, I'm just sitting here enjoying the history lesson. I didn't, like I said, I didn't cut my teeth into Portland wrestling until 1972. And, at that time, obviously the promotion was very well established. And, just living a couple of blocks from the Medford Armory, I'm pretty sure you all know where I was every other Wednesday night.
How sad, just to kind of date myself here. 1972 is the year I was born.
Ouch. Thanks, Mike. That made my night.
Sorry, Joe. All right, we are being joined by the fourth panelist on our show tonight. He is currently working for Texas All-Star Wrestling, as well as being one half. I seem to be having an echo situation here. Hold on just a second.
Okay, baby.
Technical difficulties. It happens with these live shows all the time. So, anyways, as I was saying, current wrestler with Texas All-Star Wrestling, co-owner of DOA Wrestling here in Oregon. I'd like to welcome to IHWE Radio, Mr. Jason Sullivan. Jason, thank you for joining us tonight.
Hey, thanks for having me on, guys. How's everybody doing?
Doing good.
Doing good.
Doing good.
Who's all out here? I'm sorry for coming in late. Who's all out here?
We are being joined by, obviously, the illustrious Joe Souza, Mike Rogers, and Matt Farmer.
Okay, cool. What's up, guys?
How's it going?
We're all doing good.
Awesome.
Yes, indeed.
So where are we at in our history lesson?
Mike started us off. He just gave us an overview of everything from the 40s on, pretty much. So
Oh, beautiful, beautiful. Well, I'm just gonna sit back and listen, and then I'll just throw some stuff out whenever.
Jason's gonna play color.
He's gonna take it easy tonight.
Always.
But being that he just joined us, I'm going to kind of throw him on the spot here for a second, because after that history lesson, we're now going to go into some of our panel questions here. And the first one I have is, what was your first experience with Portland wrestling? So, Jason, we're going to give that question to you first.
My first memory that I could, and it's just a vague recollection, it was at the sports arena. It had been 1977 or 78. I was only like 3 or 4 years old. And it was a steel cage match with Jesse Ventura. I cannot remember who his partner was, but I remember it was Buddy Rose and Ed Wiskowski as their opponents. And my first memory that I could ever remember was Jesse Ventura picking up Buddy Rose and throwing him head first into the steel cage. And that just, like, that was it. Like, they had me hooked right there. Like, the blood didn't scare me or nothing. I loved it.
Joe, what was your first experience with Portland wrestling?
My first experience, was when we first moved up to Medford in 1972. And we happened to live a couple of blocks away from the Medford Armory. And we saw the big Wrestling Wednesday night sign. So that Wednesday night, my father, rest his soul, myself, we went to the matches. Now, the undercard, I vaguely remember. I do remember seeing Al Madrill and Stephen Littlebear. Tito Montez was the referee, but the main event, which I can just see it right now, on one side of the corner you had Dutch Savage and Stan Stasiak, and on the other corner you had Bull Ramus and Clay Spencer, or Ken Mantell. And the match was just off the hook. It was an awesome match. Stasiak led a gusher, and now, being a little kid, I read the wrestling magazines, I saw the pictures of the blood, what have you. Didn't freak me out while looking at the photos, but seeing it that close, it not only got me hooked, but it freaked me out, and I almost started crying. Like, Dad, we got to leave, and no, we're not leaving, we're going to see this. But nonetheless, I was hooked, and, being a big wrestling fan at that time, I was very lucky because living in Medford, we got to watch Portland wrestling every Saturday night on Channel 12. But in Medford, we also got KTXL Channel 40 from Sacramento, so we got to watch big-time wrestling, the Shires stuff, from 5 to 6 o'clock on Saturday. So I got the best of both worlds. But the thing with the kayfabe thing was I was kind of torn because up in Oregon, Dutch Savage, Lonnie Main, big-time good guys. However, in San Francisco, they were big-time bad guys, so I actually saw them on both sides of the fence, if you will.
So I will bring the question now to you, Matt. What was your first experience with Portland wrestling?
It's so similar to what Jason said. We're about the same age, but probably 77, 78 was the first time I saw Portland wrestling. I grew up in Tacoma, so we actually saw the Seattle version of the Portland Wrestling television show, which was an edited 1-hour version of the previous Saturday's show, because it was like ran on a bicycle. And I think the first event that I saw was Rose against the Royal Kangaroos, which would have been 77, 78, somewhere around there. And like Jason, I just remember Rose's face being covered in a complete mask of blood. And, that got me hooked. In Tacoma, we got weekly house shows, not weekly house shows, but monthly house shows. And I got an opportunity to go once in a while, so that was awesome for me.
All right, now, Mike, you gave us the brief history of everything, as well as reading newspaper articles sideways. What would be your first experience with Portland?
Well, my mom used to watch wrestling, and the first time that I ever saw it, I was just absolutely mesmerized. And the first show that I was able to go to was either about 1968 or 69, and I'm from Seaside, so it was a spot show. The midgets were on the show, so I'm sure it was a split show. They were probably somewhere else as well that night. But I do remember Tony Borne had just made his split with Lonnie May the first time. So Tony Borne was a babyface. He teamed with Luigi Massera against Frank Shields, who was also known as Bull Belinsky, and a wrestler by the name of Soldat Gorky. And Gorky was really big in the Northwest previously. I had never seen him on TV before, so I didn't really know who he was. And it being a split night, he just must have been filling in. And then also, I don't remember what midgets were on the show, but I'm sure there was two midgets. And then the opener was Stan Stasiak and Sandy Barr. And I remember at being 8 or 9 years old, just that sold it for me. I was hooked.
Well, I can definitely share my first experience here. I grew up in Northern California. I've lived here all my life, but my brother and his wife lived in Portland, and we used to go up and visit them during the holidays. And my brother loved wrestling. He's got a picture of him and Roddy Piper at a bar in Portland, Oregon. That picture's probably 40 years old. He's still got it. Loves that thing. But he was watching the Saturday night wrestling matches, and I believe it might have been the Grappler. I'm not sure, because I was 8 or 9 years old, so it was around 80 to 81. So I don't know if he was there at that time. But it was the main event. He was bleeding, so there's blood all soaked up in the mat. I'm 8 years old. I'm behind my father's chair, just freaking out, thinking, "Oh my God, this guy's bleeding. What's going on? What's the problem?" And my brother's yelling at the TV, calling this guy a pansy, a lightweight. It's just a little blood. Get out there and fight. So I was 8 years old. I'm traumatized by what I'm watching on the screen. And that was my first experience watching Portland wrestling. Now, just to kind of get an idea here, in 80-81, who was I watching possibly as in the mask? I mean, it was either Grappler or I've heard maybe Top Gun.
It was the Destroyer, I bet.
Yeah, the Destroyer.
That would have been the Destroyer at that time.
Grappler didn't come until 1987.
Okay. As I said, my Portland history.
Destroyer Fidel Sierra, that he worked as Destroyer, the Assassin, Top Gun, all in Portland. So.
Okay.
Yeah, it's funny. He's the only guy that probably lost like 2 loser leave town matches, just put on a different mask and came back.
Yeah.
Wasn't that kind of the way they always did that back then? You lost a loser leaves town match and you came back like you were the Midnight Rider, the Yellow Dog, or depending on what territory you're in.
You lost a loser league town and you showed your face beforehand. Like, Sierra, he did it great, man. He just kept switching gimmicks, but it was just all hoods.
Yeah.
So, since we're now talking about Fidel Sierra, we brought up the Grappler, Stan Stasiak, and all that. Who are some of the other notable names that came through the Portland territory, and what were some of the notable feuds that you guys remember from that time?
I think one of the most notable names would have to be Dutch Savage. Not only was he part of the office, he promoted a lot of the Washington towns by the mid-'70s. He also worked out of the Vancouver office too, so he was in between both offices. And of course, in Portland, he started from the '60s on in one of the biggest feuds of the year.
Anybody else got anything to chime in on here?
Well, I'll mention one wrestler that I kind of felt Portland wrestling dropped the ball on, and it's Gino Hernandez, who was here in 1978, and he had been on top in Detroit previously. He'd won the United States title from the Sheik, so he had been on top, and he'd also had some success in Texas. He after he left Portland, had more success, but I just really think with his looks, he could have been a really fantastic babyface on top. He never really reached maybe semi-main event, but he was one I thought that they dropped the ball on just a little bit. I think he could have some success.
Is there a reason why they dropped the ball on him?
1978. The only thing I can really think of is they needed him to be in the preliminaries. I know they had Snuka, Lonnie. They were probably the top, and along with Dutch, they were probably on top at that time.
I think a lot of it also had to do with the fact that he knew he could go to Houston and get those big paydays on Friday nights. He was kind of like homesteaded in there.
Sure.
Yeah, that makes complete sense, because he could go there one day a week and make big bucks and then fill in his dates, with World Class or even Bill Watts if he could, or Joe Blanchard.
Yeah, and plus you're home you're home. So
I think what do you guys think about Bull Ramus overall in the history of things?
Bull Ramus, that man, he could have a feud with just about anybody. Most notably, Savage, Snuka. Now, when Ramus came in, Bull came in with the reputation that he was going to steamroll everybody, and I believe one of his first matches against Lonnie, he broke Lonnie's arm, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, in which I believe that sent Lonnie to the New York territory. I could be off on a bit, but from what I've read and heard, one of his first matches was against Lonnie, but his feuds were with Dutch Savage, oh my goodness, and Snuka, and especially when he teamed up with the late Ripper Collins. That's another one.
Yeah, Bull carried the territory from the early 70s, from about 1972 to about 1976.
He was. Oh,
go ahead, Matt.
He was also instrumental in kind of giving that rub to Buddy when he came in, because they were doing that three-man team for a little while, because Bull was Jesse Ventura's partner, and Buddy on his first night in came in and won the tag titles with Jesse Ventura, and so it built that dynamic there of putting Buddy into that automatic main event spot.
There's a common theme there where one top heel passes the torch, so to speak, to another top heel, because Buddy kind of did that indirectly with Rip Oliver, and then Rip Oliver also did that with the Grappler. Who, because I'm not as sharp on the early stuff as Matt and Mike and maybe even Joe might be, but who would have been the one to pass the torch to Bull?
The Kangaroos were there a little previous. And Dutch was the heel. The Kangaroos turned Dutch babyface, but Dutch would have been the heel right prior to Bull. Now,
didn't Bull wrestle as a babyface for a very short time before he left Portland? Because I saw a picture on Dutch's site, a picture of Bull and Snuka posing together in full pre-match regalia in the ring.
Yeah, they did. It was a short time, probably about 1976. Bull kind of broke up with the Iron Sheik and started teaming with Snuka and Dutch, but it was for a short time.
Okay.
And, it was kind of getting towards, Bull was past his prime, let's put it that way, at that time. And he didn't seem to get over as well as you would have expected.
Now, I made my little joke earlier, 1972, that Joe referred to, was when I was born. So in my experience when watching Portland and with my brother and all that, I remember it was the time frame where you had, Roddy Piper, you had Buddy Rose, Ed Wiskowski was there. What were what was going on during those times, and what were those guys like, going through the territory, because those are kind of notable names that I remember.
Well, during that time period, it was almost similar to how Jerry Lawler was in Memphis, but it was Buddy Rose in that spot. And even though guys like Piper and Martell were as over as anybody ever can be, everything kind of revolved around Rose and his weekly antics. He was like the big foil for the longest time, so almost every feud kind of intertwined with what he was doing during that time period.
It was that was what Ed Colonel Wiskowski, he called it the glory days for Owens, or at least at that point for him, because he said that during that point, and I believe it was the summer of '79, it was one of the only summers that they actually ever that he could recollect that they actually drew throughout the whole summer, and the houses didn't fall off, because in Portland, once the summer hits, everybody wants to go outside. They don't want to go inside, and I guess they all made a lot of money that summer with them. Rick Martel, the Sheepherders. It was a really good crew.
Yeah, I think there's even some of those old TV shows where Frank Bonema, because he would often talk about the house that night, and he was saying, it's a hot summer night here, because it was like an August show, and he says, even though it's a hot summer night, it's about 100 degrees in here, we got a full house.
Yeah, Frank was, it was funny. He was actually very honest and forthright on his commentary about even the houses sometimes.
Yeah, he would sit there and say, we've only got a half a house tonight, but the action's great.
Exactly.
I'd rather listen. I'd rather listen to Mr. Bonema, being honest instead of something being described as, and you're looking at something that's completely different. I mean, that was the one thing with Frank Bonema. He was very honest, well respected, and his call of the action, which he's one of my major influences. When he said he read a letter from a fan whose spouse was vision was impaired, but the spouse could actually listen to Frank's call from bell to bell, and that stuck in my head to this day. So whenever I do play-by-play, that's my style. I follow Frank's to the T. Basically you call exactly what's going on in the ring from bell to bell, and with Frank it was just that much more credibility, and he was just great. He was just a fantastic play-by-play guy.
He was, and Frank, he does not get a lot of national attention, but I bring it up a lot when I discuss great announcers. He was one of the greatest, especially for his time frame. He was as good as Gordon Soley was for that time period. It was a different business then, so their style was different, but Frank was awesome. I mean, he was top-notch for that period.
Oh, no doubt about it. He ranked right up there with Gordon Soley and Lance Russell for sure.
And with Frank, when you would listen to his call, it was like he was just sitting right next to you, just talking to you about the match. That's how you felt. It wasn't like someone just kind of like you're going to listen to me and here we go. It's like and when his voice got amped up, you best listen, because something big was going to happen in the ring. Now, if I may, real quick, because we were talking about around 79, 1980, if I can throw a name out there, Tim Brooks, Killer or Bad News Brooks, as he was up in Portland. When I got to meet him a few years ago at Cauliflower Alley, he was very proud to say that Portland was the only territory that he worked as a babyface, even though he turned to a face from a heel. But, he told me very, very proudly that Portland was the only territory that he wrestled and got the cheers.
Isn't Portland like Bizarro land when that happens? Because Brooks was a face. They made a decision to do that with Piper, which hadn't been done before. I mean, and afterwards it's a no-brainer. But even the sheepherders at first, who would have thought, of them being faces, without doing the silly bushwhacker gimmick, but actually, the sheepherders being over baby faces.
Oh man, the sheepherders were awesome too. In both roles. And it's funny, like if you talk to like Luke Williams today, and a lot of the guys, they're so fond of that time they spent in Portland.
Everybody just enjoyed it. Another name, if I may for a second, is Kurt Von Steiger. Now, in that time period, in the early 70s, throughout the Northwest, they would actually have their own local angles, if you will. There's one particular match in Medford, Ripper Collins and Kurt Von Steiger. They were in a tag team match, and after several miscues, Collins turned on Von Steiger. And so Von Steiger threw the challenge out, and then 2 weeks later at the Medford Armory, you had Kurt Von Steiger against Ripper Collins in the main event. And when Collins came out, crowd booed big time, but when Kurt Von Steiger came out, you would have thought it was Savage, Snuka, or Lonnie Main. I mean, that place popped like a mother, and for one night, he could absolutely do no wrong.
I can add something. It's very similar in Seaside, probably right around the same time periods. We would see monthly shows, and I remember almost the same type of incident. I think it was Kurt Von Steiger, in fact, and he got into a kind of a one-night feud with Kim Sung-ho, and they came back and the following month and had, if I remember right, a judo jacket match, and I believe, even though in the territory Kurt Von Steiger was still a heel, he was the baby face there in Seaside that night.
Wow.
Yes? Are you there?
We've got dead air, I guess.
I was just waiting for... No, I was just going to make the comment, the fans up in the Northwest, they're very, very subtle. They know who they want to cheer for and who they want to boo. I mean, they let it be known.
Now, I have a quick question.
Let me jump in there. Oh, sorry. Just let me jump in here real quick. I want to apologize to the panelists as well as the listeners. Unfortunately, sometimes at Blog Talk Radio, we do have like a few seconds where we'll drop for some reason. So if there is a little bit of dead air, give us a second, and we'll kind of kick it back in. So I apologize for that.
We forgive you, Mike.
Technical difficulties, that's how we refer to them.
Yeah. One thing I was curious about is how Portland wrestling was a little different in a lot of territories because they didn't have a huge bicycle on the tape, and by people that aren't familiar with that, what they would do is they would Portland wrestling for the most part was live Saturdays or a short tape delay. But in certain markets, like the ones up north, we actually received the television a week later because they had to ship the tape up there. Was Southern Oregon that way? Southern or Eastern Oregon that way too, Mike?
I don't think so. I think Channel 12 reached most of Oregon. I don't know this for certain, but I would expect that it reached Medford and eastern cities like Pendleton. So yeah, I think Channel 12 was strong enough that it reached there.
Yeah,
Channel 12 did reach Roseburg up until about 1982 or 83, because my aunt and uncle lived down there, and when I'd go visit them, I'd be able to catch the show on Saturday nights.
Oh, okay. Yeah, see, like, I got the big-time wrestling version of it, so it was a week late, and it was only an hour. I think it went all the way up to Chehalis, Washington, Channel 12. But where I was at, in Tacoma, we also were able to get, at times, the Vancouver tape also, which was a different promotion, but Don Owens owned a percentage of the company.
Now, when I was living in San Jose, we moved to San Jose in 1975. Now, in 79, when Shire shut down as a territory, we started big-time wrestling. The Portland wrestling version, the 1 hour, started airing in San Jose and San Francisco. And I thought, whoa, this is cool. But it turned out that, Shires started bringing in the guys from Portland to run shows at the Cow Palace. And that only lasted, I believe, 2 or 3 shows because the attendance just dwindled. For starters, because Portland wrestling was every Saturday night, they had to have the wrestling at the Cow Friday nights. And at that time, fans were not accustomed to Friday night wrestling in San Francisco. It was always Saturday night. And, when you saw some of the new faces that, the fans never... they've seen Piper, Rose, Wiskowski, George Wells, but when they saw some of the other wrestlers, it was, like I said, there was something missing, obviously, when, Shire shut down as a territory, then when he brought the guys from Portland in and Kansas City and so forth. But I just wanted to chime in that Big Time Wrestling, the Portland version, was aired in San Francisco for a little while.
Yeah.
So, Jason referred to it a few minutes ago as Portland was kind of bizarro land or bizarro world with the guys coming in and doing faces and all that. We all know that Piper and Buddy Rose, Wiskowski, the guys you mentioned, they were major names during the territory time. But there are a lot of names that just traveled through, which was normal for most territories. I know Chris Adams and Chris Adams and Iceman King Parsons came from Portland over to Dallas in a talent exchange. But what were some of the other talents from other territories that came through, if it only just for a few weeks?
Tully Blanchard came probably about 1979, and he was just strictly preliminary at that point.
And so did J.J. Dillon, too, didn't he?
He came for 1 week.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Actually, I was there, and he wrestled Chris Adams at the sports arena that night.
That's right.
In March of 1973, Jumbo Tsuruta showed up for one night and wrestled Dutch Savage.
Wow. That would have probably been one of his first non-Amarillo appearances in the U.S.
I think so, yeah. I think also Baba showed up one night. He didn't wrestle, but he had an interview with Haru Suzuki. He just showed up out of the blue.
Wow. Tatsumi Fujinami wrestled up there, and he was also a Northwest champion.
Yes.
Yeah.
Does anybody know the story of that? Of why? How did he become the Northwest champion? Like, what was the politics or whatever behind that?
I don't know for sure, but I know at the same time Fujinami had even went to Memphis, and a few of the Northwest guys were trying to get into New Japan because Grappler went there, but and I believe they mentioned that he got the title back from Fujinami in Japan, but I don't actually think he got a pinfall on him in Japan.
No, actually, I think they wrestled and he didn't get a pinfall.
What's that?
I know for sure he didn't get a pinfall. I believe they did a Broadway or something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
And even when Fujinami got the title in Portland, Grappler had said that he would, if he didn't beat him, that he'd give him the title. So when Fujinami got the title, he didn't get a win. I think it went to a draw.
Oh, wow. I wonder if it was one of those deals where they just gave him a little bit of money to get the rub, to maybe get Fujinami a little push to the Japanese media, because becoming a star in America was a big deal to the Japanese at the time.
Sure.
It's possible. I mean, and it was a good trade-off because it would give, one or two of the boys a tour over in New Japan also.
Yeah, and if Grappler was booking at the time, that was probably his reward for doing the favor.
Yeah, and back in those days, man, they paid $1 for guys to go over there for the tours.
Yeah.
I mentioned the talent exchange with. Oh, sorry. I mentioned the talent exchange between Texas and Portland. That's where Chris Adams, Q Parsons went over to Texas. Who from Texas was part of that exchange? Who did Fritz send over?
Was it Al Madrill?
I know Brian Adidas was here for a short time.
Yeah. I think it had more to do with Red Bastine, because Red was close to the office in Dallas, and he was also close to Don, and I think he was the one that orchestrated a lot of those talent changes. If there was like a young guy in Texas that they wanted to get some seasoning, he would send him up to Portland, because that's what he did with Buddy Rose.
And then they sent Steve Dahl and Steve Dane and Scott Casey up this way back in '86, '87, I believe.
Yeah, I'd be willing to bet it had more to do with Red Bastine than anything.
Okay. Now, we've talked about a lot of the talent so far, and I'm sure we'll talk about some more here during the course of this panel, but we haven't talked a lot about the promoter. And I've heard a lot of stories about Don Owens from different wrestlers over the years. Mike, maybe you or Matt can kind of fill in. What was Don Owens like as a promoter? And because I know a lot of people consider he's basically the name behind Portland wrestling.
Well, yeah, Don was definitely the boss out in the Northwest. Even the Vancouver office, or earlier than that in the 50s and 60s, where we had up to 3 booking offices in this area, Don was always the man. And so he kind of controlled everything. But as a promoter himself personally, I think his best days were prior to the 60s as a promoter, because from the 70s on, he pretty much just ran one town himself, and that was Portland. Everybody else was his officers.
So who else was involved in the different towns, along with Don?
Elton, Dutch, Sandy. At different times, Harry Elliott or Rod Fenton were in charge of certain towns too. Like in Washington, some of his northern cities, each city had its own personal promoter, because Washington was weird at the time. They gave out licenses to certain regions. But Don, pretty much just stuck to that little area there and left his partners to promote the rest of the towns.
Yeah, because Don just ran Saturday nights, and then when Elton passed away, didn't he take over Friday nights also?
I think so, or was that Barry?
I think Barry started taking, when Dutch left, I think Barry started taking over spot shows.
Yeah.
When did Sandy wind up taking over the spot shows during the week, like full time?
I think it was just. Oh, go ahead.
I know Sandy had Salem in the early '80s, and on through. I think he had Salem most of the time. That may have been his only regular town.
Yeah, I remember Sandy at the Salem Armory in 1992. He did a 10-year anniversary of when he took over Salem, and he actually put over. I was doing ring crew for him at the time, and he actually put over the fact that he brought in Andre the Giant, and he said he did a bigger house than Elton had ever done, which he was thrilled with.
That's awesome. But Sandy was running towns for Don, spot shows, even as early as the 60s. When he was like the payday guy. He would pick up the paydays and bring it back to the office, and for little spot shows throughout Washington and Eastern Oregon.
Huh.
So he was kind of like what Jeff Jarrett was for the Goulas down in Tennessee in his early days. Or Jerry, excuse me.
Yeah, Jerry. Yeah, because you got to remember back then, they didn't telegraph money or transfer money. everybody picked up the box office at the end of the night. Somebody did, and had to bring it back to the office. And it was usually a guy like Sandy Barr or Dutch Savage that would do that for them.
Now, Sandy took over the Portland Wrestling after Don. Is that correct?
Yeah, he did.
Yeah.
He took it over.
Okay, and then that's when it was Championship Wrestling USA or something like that you called it?
Yes.
Correct.
Okay. Now, so we've gone through, Don Owens had it, went to Sandy Barr. Now, this is kind of where I joined in from the years I remember it, and this is where I met Matt, and I met Jason, all that, was when Frank Culbertson ran the Portland Wrestling group for a little while. How was, Jason, Matt, this might be more for you. Mike, you might have something to add to it. What was Frank Culbertson's version of Portland Wrestling like compared to the days with Don Owens and Sandy Barr?
Well, I don't think you could compare it. It's like apples and oranges. It was a different time frame. I never worked for Don. I did work for Sandy quite a bit for Championship Wrestling USA, but by 2000 it was a completely different business than it would have been in 85 or 82.
Yeah, and I think by the time Frank was running, it was 2004, and it had changed over, and there was a lot of different talent that people didn't know who they were, and all of us, we were not nearly as seasoned as the guys from the Don Owens days, because they were on the road 6-7 days a week. We were wrestling 6 to 8 days a month if we're lucky.
Yeah. And Mike would probably know, because Mike was kind of in with Frank at the beginning of the adventure, weren't you?
Yeah, when Frank opened up at WB, like 6 or 7 months there, I was pretty close with him. I helped do some ring announcing with him, and so at that moment it was more of a TV product because they were taping at the studio, and it was a pretty good product. I mean, Brian Danielson was there, Luther was there, Scotty Mack was there. It was a pretty good show. Oh yeah, the Suicide Kings were there.
What's really funny, and it's kind of sad, but I think that very first taping, myself and my partner, the Suicide Kings, wrestled Scotty Mack and Havoc in the main event, and I believe the opening match was Daniel Bryan in the opening match, which, it's kind of like hey, look where they've went.
Yeah, I saw the first of the studio version. You said you wrestled, it was technically Scotty Mack and Havoc. Wasn't there like a storyline going where you broke his arm or something? I seem to recall the TV bits with that. I have it on tape.
Yeah, that was one of the last shows that they did before they got closed down temporarily. Yeah, I don't recall the entire angle, but it was something where we ambushed him and broke his wrist or something like that. Okay.
I just remember there was a promo with Nikki Sixx, and he was doing this, talking about, I forget who it was that had a broken wrist, but that he was crying and whining and being a little baby. And
yeah, we did do that. We did do that. We came out and wrapped ourselves up in fake gauzes and pretended like we were hurt and overselling it, like we were crybabies, imitating Scotty.
One of the things I enjoyed about Culbertson's Portland Wrestling were the house shows, and there were not very many. Maybe I can count them all on one hand, perhaps. But, watching, when it came back to the Eugene, Lane County Fairgrounds, Moondog Moretti and Grappler in the steel cage match with Grappler's boot on the loaded pole. That was such a big thrill. Barry Owen announcing them. And Matt, you and Nikki Sixx having that feud for a while, with Chris Del Sol helping at ringside. That was quite a thrill watching that too.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, those house shows were a lot of fun. The TVs were good too, but the problem with that though was the timing of a lot of the matches. I recall, especially the earlier versions, time was getting cut off of matches because of people would run long, or it was just an inexperienced product, so it was kind of done on the fly.
Same in the later versions.
What's that?
It was still the same in the later versions. The time was getting cut, and it was all the same.
Yeah, I recall like on one of the last WD tapings, the Suicide Kings were wrestling Mac and Havoc, and we were supposed to do some kind of a deal where Havoc and Scotty went over, and it was going to be like a 15-minute match, but by the time we were ready to go out, it had to be cut to like a 4 or 5 minute deal. And Piper was there, and I was talking to Piper, and Piper was like, refuse to lose. Don't lose, because you're going to look like crap if you lose in 3 or 4 minutes on TV, So we changed the finish at the last second.
So it went from Culbertson had it. He ran it from 2004. You said to what was it? 2006. He was only there for a couple of years, correct?
It was like almost 2007, I think.
2007,
yeah,
okay.
Probably.
So
and there was a lull in there too, because between the WB promotion and the Comcast promotion, because wrestling was not, they deregulated the commission during that period of time.
Okay. Now, the Culbertson version, you mentioned some of the names that were through there. I remember guys, you had Scotty Mac, Dr. Luther, Moondog Moretti was there. They brought in Buddy Wayne. They had, help me out here, his partner.
Samito.
Buddy Wayne's Samito, thank you.
Samito.
10 years and 3 kids or whatever, my mind's starting to slip a little bit.
You know what? One of the coolest memories for me about that Portland wrestling from Comcast there was when Fidel Sierra, he was coming in as well, but he started doing the Top Gun gimmick again. And I believe it was myself and Ed Moretti. I believe it was me and Ed Moretti. We got a chance to work Grappler and Top Gun, Fidel Sierra as Top Gun, in a tag match, and that was awesome for me because those were guys that I grew up watching.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Now, what I was going to lead up to here was we had those names on, but there was also there was the younger guys that were coming through there, and like I said, that's where I met Jason, that's where I met Matt and all that. But you had names. Obviously, we had Cosmic River. We had, I believe, Azul Angel was there a couple times, and all that. And now some of those guys have moved on. Now, Jason, you can help out here. A lot of those guys are now top names in the Pacific Northwest. So what was it like coming in as the new guy into that territory and all that, and comparing then to now?
Well, at that point when we all started coming in, like Matt had left and Grappler was he had just left at that point, and a lot of the Canadian guys had left, and they had replaced them with the California, like with Big Ugly and Vinny Massaro and Adam Thornstowe, and I guess they were there a little bit beforehand, but they actually started bringing in more guys, and a lot of the guys have stuck around since then, like Azul Angel, who's Ethan HD, who's probably the best young talent in Oregon and Washington. He's just so good. You got Jeremy Blanchard, who's money. There was, I'm trying to think who else was. There's not really a lot of guys that were with Portland Wrestling that are still here, though. They're all in California or Canada, so there really wasn't a lot of local talent.
No, there wasn't. There was that weird shift of in the mid-2000s, I think, or maybe early 2000s, where there was just a huge influx of new guys. And like every territory or every promotion, you got a lot that start out, but only a few guys stick around for the long haul, like Jason and Ethan and, those guys. It's hard for guys to stay around for more than 4 or 5 years,
Well, it's different now, though, because we've got a ton of guys that have been around for like 5, 6, 7, 8 years. And I think the difference is that there's been more consistency in promotions running. Like Dub-C has been running for, I think, 8, 9 years. DOA has been running for 7 years. So, I mean, it gives people a place to still wrestle, more than, once a month.
Yeah, I think the Northwest is in its best shape now than it's probably been in the last 15 years, probably, Mike. Would you agree? As far as talent and...
I would agree, because the different promotions are able to sustain themselves, and they're getting up there in 5, 6 years, and WC's been going a little bit longer. So, yeah, I would agree.
Yeah, and I also want to give a shout-out to ECCW up in Canada, too, because a lot of the talent mixes. And, they just celebrated their, 18th anniversary. And, I mean, for an indie promotion to go 18 years, you got to give them kudos.
Well, and not only that, if you think about it, like 5 years ago, nobody was drawing over 150 people without a TV show. And now, that's for us. If we don't hit that number, then we're like, what's wrong? If Dub-C doesn't hit that number, they're like, what's wrong? And ECCW, they've been doing they've been averaging 200 to 300 people a show just for the Vancouver shows, which is incredible. Thinking, 5 years ago they were happy with 115, 120.
Yeah, and it's weird because I was like on their first week shows or whatever, and it's just like, man, it's been 18 years already.
You're aging yourself.
Yeah, it ages you when you think about that. And I remember being in Mike Rogers' match, I don't know how long ago now it was. How long ago was that? 16, 17 years ago, Mike?
Oh, in that Battle Royal?
Yeah, Mike's only wrestling match where he wrestled.
We tried to forget about that.
No,
hey Mike, then I'm going to offer you up a spot in the DOA Rumble next year. Then we got to reunite the crew. We'll put you and Matt in there.
So, Mike, since it got brought up, do you care to tell us about your in-ring debut?
Well, it was for a Dave DeBassi show, and I knew it was going to be a battle royal, and Ed Moretti and I were driving up, and I knew DeBassi would let me be in the battle royal if I wanted to be in the battle royal, and I told Ed, I think I'd like to be in the battle royal. I said, I know I can't go over the top rope, and so I'm just going to have somebody pin me. And Brian Alvarez taped it for me, and and I apologized to everybody. I was so bad. But
you were money, Mike. You were money. I thought.
Wait, you gotta, Mike. You have to tell them about your scream or your roar.
Well, Ed Moretti later on the drive home said, Mike, you were screaming. I go, no, I wasn't. He goes, I swear to God, you were screaming.
Mike did like the Jerry Lawler when he pulled off his ref shirt. It was like Lawler pulling down his straps. Or he just as soon as he threw that ref shirt off, he just fired up and let the loudest roar. He sounded just like Molina. And he started flailing away and punching people. Or forearming people, I think it was.
No, I remember
we need to get this up online.
I remember I got Nikki Sixx with about 4 or 5 English uppercuts. I don't know where that came from.
it was out of frustration.
Shooter Rogers.
I think Ed was supposed to pin me, and suddenly I look around and he's gone. And I grabbed Mike Jones and I said, "You got to pin me." and we flounder around, and he falls on top of me, and I tell him, I go, you have to count because I was the ref.
Wow, that's awesome. I think about that every once in a while. But, Mike refereed for quite a while, and even went up to Cloverdale, British Columbia, and refereed a lot of matches. And at the time, Cloverdale was probably the hottest arena in the Northwest for, they were doing consistent business of 400 or 500 people for a while there, right, Mike?
Yeah, those were some great times. I went up there with Ed for about 6 months.
Yeah, and I think I worked Nikki Sixx every show for like a year, Cloverdale. But they had the best, seriously, like one of the best crews of veterans, and rookies, and there wasn't that many rookies. It was just me and Nick. But the best crew of guys, even guys like Lance Storm and Gama and Akam Singh would come in, and a lot of the Calgary guys, Bad News and Jerry Morrow. It was a great time up there.
Do you remember the show where Pat Brady? Let's see, what was that guy's name? One guy was in a match and he caught somebody off the top rope, and his head hit the floor because his feet went out from underneath.
Styles.
Who was it?
Wasn't it JT Styles?
Yes.
Yeah.
That was the last time he ever wrestled. And so they go outside. He's got a horrible concussion.
Yeah.
Pat Brady comes run into the ring. He goes to step up on the ring and blows out his leg. Now he's laying in the ring. He's like got a torn ACL or whatever. JT Styles is supposed to come back. He's out with a concussion. I'm reffing. I go running into the dressing room to get somebody to help, and there's not one person in the dressing room.
Oh, wow.
And then Tim went crazy, and the EMTs came to get Pat
Tim
Brady.
Went crazy?
And Tim's ready to fight the EMTs.
Well, remember there was like 2 shows in a row where Tim got into a brawl with this crowd.
Yeah.
Out in the parking lot, there was a time where Gama Singh was there, so the crowd, half the crowd was what how do you call it, West Indian?
Uh-huh.
And Tim poked one of them in the eye or something like that, and the big brawl erupted. It was crazy up there. Paul Lesenby was shooting on people.
Sounds like a good time was had by all.
Yeah.
So, Joe, we haven't heard much from you.
I am enjoying listening to the stories and reading some of the accounts in Mike's newsletter. It's just all coming into my head. The blown knee, the brawls outside Cloverdale, and Mike's adventures up in Cloverdale. And Mike, you might want to give a story on how Cowboy Lang decided to rib you a little bit in Medford.
The first match I ever reffed was Cowboy Lang and Little Nasty Boy, and Buddy and Ed Moretti were on that show, and some girls were on the show. And so I think it was 3 singles matches and then a 6-person to finish it up. And so Cowboy Lang's there, and I'm a little nervous because it's the first time I've ever reffed, and having a lot of respect, realizing what a legend Cowboy Lang is. And I told him, I remember seeing you when I was a little boy. And I was probably 35 at the time. And he looked at me and he said something very unkind. And I said, I may have said the wrong thing.
Now, Mike, you brought up Buddy Wayne there for a second. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I've got one good Cloverdale story. It was the first night I reffed there, and the main event, Tim Flowers and Randy, the Pimp Taylor, and it's a bloodbath. It's just the ring is absolutely covered in blood, And Tim picks up the pimp, and he's holding him as a pile driver. And he's just holding him, and Pimp's just, and there's just literally a puddle underneath him while he's just holding him up, getting ready to pile drive him. And I remember watching it. I remember thinking, oh, I'm getting a little queasy. And the match is going to end in a ref bump. And I'm looking around the ring, and the ring is just covered in blood except one corner. And it's going to be a drop down, and I'm in the way, and Tim's going to run into me. So here it comes. Tim hits me so hard to the ribs, and I do this Three Stooges stumble roll, and I make it to that dry corner. I made it without a drop of blood on me.
Very nice.
If you know Tim and Randy, those are two guys who definitely do not want their blood getting on you.
Now, Mike, we were talking, Buddy Wayne's name came up for a minute. I recall in some of the shows at the Cleaver Armory when Frank was running, Buddy had kind of a habit of kind of giving you a little bit of the business. I recall he actually didn't wrestle a match with one of your newsletters in his hand.
Buddy, he's got such a great sense of humor. I remember reffing some of his matches, and he'd look at me and he'd start mouthing like he's trying to talk to me, and I'd circle around so I could hear him better because no real sound was coming out of his mouth. And it was just a constant rib. Like, what's he trying to tell me? He's not telling me anything. He's just trying to mess with me. He has such a great sense of humor. And
when you wrestle him, he's doing the same thing too. He's just ribbing you the whole time, or joking with you, or trying to get you to laugh. So.
And yeah, he brought my newsletter into the ring and used it as a foreign object several times, and I know he was just doing it to, get a laugh out of me. I thought it was hilarious every time.
It's funny because Mike is actually one of the first guys that I met in wrestling, on the outskirts of wrestling or whatever, that actually was smart to the business, and he may have been one of the first guys that I wouldn't say smartened me up because I understood, but he was probably one of the first guys that kind of led me in the direction of understanding the business of wrestling a little bit more, because Nick and I used to drive down to Portland and go to a lot of like the little spot shows or indie shows or whatever we could get. Even I think I met Mike at the first time at the Portland Sports Arena.
I think so.
I can't remember. And we were in high school.
We were at the Tanya Harding show too.
Yeah, that's right too. Yeah, we did that show too. But I remember we went out to you to dinner or to grab some pizza or something like that afterwards, and we were still in high school. Not you, but
that sounds
me.
Creepy.
Yeah, it is. And you were a school teacher.
That's really creepy.
Wow, this is going in a bad place.
Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, to the panel, because I'm pretty sure that Mike hasn't been there, but the Portland Sports Arena now, as we all know, it's a youth center, church type of thing. I've had the pleasure to go there and get a tour of the building one time, and it was the same night as a DOA show where the main event was Grappler and Raven, with Matt Borne as the referee. This was a couple of years back. Now, has anybody else on the panel been to the sports arena as it is now as a church?
Yeah, I have. Actually, I was with Buddy Wayne and Brian Alvarez, and I believe Caden Matthews. We all rode to Portland together one time, and we stopped off at the Portland Sports Arena, and Buddy took us by Sandy Barr's old house, and we went into the Portland Sports Arena, which is now like that church, and I just explained to them that Buddy wanted to show his son, and I pointed to Brian Alvarez, where he was conceived at.
Oh no!
I pointed back towards the heel locker room.
Oh my!
Yeah. So that was my story recently.
We were mentioning at the beginning of the show, I mentioned you're the editor of Ring Around the Northwest newsletter. And how did you get started with that, and how many years has that been going now?
My friend Ken Hamlin was putting out a bulletin called Ring Around the World, and I was helping with that a little bit and helping him fill out some stories and everything, and it was mostly just features on all around the country. And I thought maybe I'd start a bulletin that just was around the Northwest, and I could get results from at least 3 nights a week. And this was 1983. I didn't know anybody in the business. It was just I just put it out on my typewriter. It was about 3 pages long, and just from what I'd see on TV and my thoughts. And then in 1987, I met Ed Moretti. He was at the mall, and over the years, we had corresponded off and on, and I introduced myself to him, and he remembered me, and from that point on, he had me ref a couple of his shows, and I started making trips with him and things, and so I just started getting to know a few of the wrestlers, and at one point there, I started having interviews, and that was really kind of the key to the bulletin, I think. I had quite a few interviews with some really the top people in the business, I think, and as long as there was a connection to the Northwest. So I interviewed Don Leo Jonathan and Lou Thez and John Tolos and Bull Ramus and Killer Brooks and on and on and on. And I was really lucky to be able to interview a lot of people.
Yeah, and Mike was one of the first guys that was doing those printed shoot interviews. There may have been maybe John Clark had done a few too, but you were one of the first newsletters that were continually doing those shoot interviews.
And I was so happy when people would do them and really, really open up. Some of the interviews that I was lucky to have, Rick Martel, I just looked at that one recently, and he was just as honest as he could be. John Tolos, although he was careful, he was very friendly, and people were shocked that I had that one. So I think it's just if people felt comfortable with you, then they were able to open up a little bit more, and that was my goal. I just always wanted to learn something in every interview.
Hey, Mike, did you ever meet any resistance or anything at first from? Because back then, kayfabe was just so huge. Or did a lot of the guys just shock you and, like you said, open up?
One time I and this was very early, I tried to interview Scotty the Body, and I visited with him for a while on the phone, and then he said, "No, I must not have said the right thing." He goes, "I'm going to pass on the interview," and I said, "No, that's fine." And sometimes I would just always be respectful all the time, and because I thought maybe in the future, there'd be another chance. I had asked Grappler to do an interview, and even I got to know him a little bit. This is the best story of all. The very first time I met Buddy Rose, the first words out of his mouth was, "I will never do an interview."
Wow.
And I got to know Buddy pretty well, but I laughed. I laughed because he looked at me, shook hands, he goes, "I will never do an interview."
But what's funny is, like, when I got into the business in the mid to early 90s, there was still that residual heat from people that were considered like dirt sheet writers or readers. I remember hearing a story about one of Sandy Barr's boys getting major heat because he brought out a newsletter, and it actually kind of exposed him to the business, even though he was in the business after reading that sheet. You know, and there was always that tension there with guys that supported the newsletter and, or, you know, publicly supported it, and guys that didn't. So there, even in the 90s, there was still that resistance.
Right. You know, if I may jump in on that, there was one time, and it was a little tense, a little nervous for me. I went to a Sandy show up in Vancouver, Washington. I believe it was the Bagley Center, and I was friends with the late Brian Cox, Bruiser Brian, and I brought 2 copies of the newsletter, and it had Brian on the cover. So I gave Brian one, you know, to give, and the other one if he could, you know, sign for me. And you know, he said, "Oh, it'd be a pleasure." And so he goes, "Hey, you know, this is really cool. I'm going to show it around." And that was about the same time I heard that, you know, Sandy was really adamant about, you know, anybody that, you know, gets caught, you know, with this newsletter or any sheet in the locker room is going to get canned. I'm thinking, oh, my God, do I really need to be caught up on this? Or if he comes up, "Hey, Sandy, look what Joe Souza gave me." He's like, oh, no. But he remembered, and so he showed a couple of the guys in the locker room. He came back and he goes, "Hey, I shared with a couple of people, but I didn't share with the boss." And I said, "Thank you so much."
I remember one time I was at a show, and the match I was watching was really bad. And one of the wrestlers rolled out of the ring. Who was in it, Mike? I'm sorry?
Who was in it?
Big Red and Hollywood Stud.
I know this story, yeah.
And Hollywood rolls out of the ring after the match was just finished. He comes right over to me and says, "Please," starts begging me, "please don't tell how bad this match was."
My goodness.
I told him it wasn't your fault.
You know what's sad? I don't want to sound like the bitter old guy, but there's a ton of guys these days that they would have a horrible match and they would think it was great.
Yeah, definitely. One of the greatest things I ever heard when I broke in was from Buddy Wayne, actually, and I'm not going to name names of who the wrestlers were because they're friends of mine, but they came into the locker room. It was their first or second match. They thought it was the greatest thing ever, and were bragging about how great it was to each other, and Buddy cut them off in Buddy Wayne's way and said, "Everything you did stunk. Everything you think you did right, you did wrong." And just laid into it for like about 3 minutes, and it was the greatest thing ever.
If I may ask, you know, to the panel, one of the unique deals about the Portland wrestling or the Don Owen territory was whenever the NWA World Champion would come in, and he wouldn't come in just to Portland. He would literally work the entire circuit. I got the honor to see Jack Briscoe defend the NWA World Title against Rasputin in Medford. And, you know, how cool is that? You know, when you get the world champion, he, you know, makes his way to the ring, and he's signing autographs and shaking hands, and it was just, to me, you know, I was like 9 or 10 years old. I was in awe, you know, because back then, you know, the business was way different. The belt meant something. It's like, wow, this is one heavy dude. Now, being that said, you know, other champions like, you know, Kaninsky, Harley Race, Ric Flair, you know, they came in and defended the belts up and down the Northwest. What are your thoughts or experiences on seeing these guys in action?
I had a chance to go to different spot shows when the world champ was coming through. So I remember I saw Ric Flair and Tom Pritchard in Malala, which is a fairly small town. I saw Ric Flair and Terry Gibbs in Albany, which again is another pretty small town. So yeah, it was especially interesting when you could catch a champion at those small towns, because chances are you could walk up and still get front row, and you're going to see them in a very intimate setting. So that's whenever they would come through, I'd look to see if they were in a close by at one of those small spot shows.
Anybody else?
Oh, go ahead.
Piper and Flair at the Expo Center back in 1983 was that was huge. You know, I think there was like 5,000 or 6,000 people in there, and everybody in town actually thought Piper was going to walk away with the championship.
Wow, that had to have been an experience with that large a crowd, 5,000 or 6,000 people. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think it was at the Expo Center, and I'm assuming they could get in about 5,000 people in there at least.
Oh wow, my favorite, and I didn't see this I've seen it on video, the Owens anniversary show. How cool was that? You know, when you have a local boy, you know, Billy Jack against Flair, and then Martel defending his title against Miller. You know, 3 world championship matches. You know, the Road Warriors defending their belts. The crowd, just listening to the crowd. I mean, it had to have been just magic because the crowd was just so involved in the deal from opening to the end.
Yeah,
it was incredible.
See, I'm from Seattle. We would get shows every 2 weeks, and when Flair would come here, he would defend against like Piper or Billy Jack, and they would have him at the Seattle Center Arena, which was a 5,000 seat arena, and they would usually draw 3,500, 4,000 to 5,000 people, and that's a great experience and a great building to watch wrestling in right up there.
So, I'm going to bring some of here. I'm curious about them since I have a panel here. Maybe you guys can fill in light on this. Joe's told me about this before, and I've heard it from a couple other sources. Was there ever a time I heard that between WCW and when he went to the WWF and became The Undertaker, that Mark Calloway was supposed to go up to Portland?
I had never heard that before. I know that Steve Austin was. He was actually scheduled to work. Was actually scheduled to come here, but I'd never heard that about Undertaker.
I had never heard that either.
Yeah, that's the first I've ever heard of that.
Okay. I wanted to kind of get the final little story on that one because I heard it was a rumor and all that, so I thought now was the time to kind of get that out there because this is a great segue as I am a professional with it sometimes. We talked about the names that were in Portland and all that. Now, there were guys that started in Portland that became, that's where they got their start, and then they went on to bigger things over the years. Mike, you brought up Scotty the Body, which we now know is Raven. Who are some of the other names that started in the Portland territory and all that have then gone on to WWF or WCW, ECW, or wherever?
Well, Portland was kind of a weird territory in that people actually didn't start in Portland, except for a few guys like Billy Jack or Matt Borne, but Don did not want to hire you if you were from the area. So it was really rare for Don to actually give somebody their first matches. But he was a territory that guys, it would be their first or second territory, or usually their second territory, where they would come in for seasoning. But Don didn't have anybody trained pretty much except a few guys that started directly in Portland.
I know Magnum TA, Terry Allen. Portland might have been his first territory. And he was trained by Buzz Sawyer, and I believe Buzz Sawyer was here in the territory when he came in.
Yeah, he followed Buzz up here after Buzz stiffed him, followed him up here, and then got his first match. And I think Billy Jack and Matt Borne had their first matches in the territory, too.
I think
Billy Jack had his in Calgary for like a month.
Okay.
Yeah. But, yeah, I believe Matt definitely was here.
Yeah. I wasn't sure, but Billy actually had a couple matches up there.
What about Jesse Barr?
So
did he have his first down here too, right?
I assume so, yeah.
You would have to include his brother. Go ahead.
I was wondering, where did then, Scott Anthony's start come from? Because I remember first time I saw him was doing this Scotty the Body in Portland.
He actually started. He was trained in New Jersey. I believe he was even trained by Larry Sharp. He actually worked for Al Tomko before he came to Portland.
Didn't he just show up unannounced?
Yeah, that's what I heard.
I've heard that story. Yeah.
He had to buy a ticket to get in, I believe.
He worked in Florida also and in Memphis right before he came to Portland.
Oh, okay. But yeah, it was rare for somebody like with Scotty's lack of experience to be put on top like that, like he was in Portland.
Now, I think had he not passed away, I think Art Barr in his last gimmick as Love Machine would have been over so huge in ECW, and as a matter of fact, they were taking a look at Art and Eddie to come in, and there was talk about they were going to do either a program with Public Enemy or with Benoit and Scorpio. I mean, just on paper, that would have been off the hook.
Yeah. Art was one of those guys that was right there on the cusp of, I think in 1994, Art was the best heel in the business. Inside the ring, personality, whole package. He just had a successful tour of New Japan, and Paul was going to bring him in December or January to ECW. So,
such a loss.
No doubt about it. I think he would have been a huge star, just like Eddie wound up being a huge star. I think he would have been right there with him.
Yeah, I actually think that Art would have gotten to that star status before anybody else because he did have that over-the-top personality. He had, like Eddie, it took him a little while to get that personality, but Art had that. He was money. You could have put him in there with as a heel against Michaels, and it would have been perfect.
Oh yeah.
Oh my God, yeah, no doubt about it.
So speaking of, we're going to go up to kind of jump up to some current time here, and Jason, I'm going to gear this question towards you. We've had, Don Owens and Sandy Barr, Frank Culbertson ran Portland Wrestling. Now there's a new kind of a landscape in Oregon. You've got West Coast Wrestling Connection. There's Blue Collar. There's Power Pit, I believe, in Roseburg. But you are, as I introduced at the beginning, one of the owners of DOA. Is there anything that now with DOA that you kind of look back on, like you borrow, or not say borrow, but you're kind of influenced by some of the things from the old Portland territory and that you might promote through DOA?
Oh, for sure. I'm not trying to recreate the wheel, man. There's so much history from the Northwest and even nationally, because I take the booking style, I actually take that from Bill Watts and Eddie Graham. I'm influenced by them hugely. And Portland, in Portland, though, I mean, it's just, it's not rushing through things, and it's not trying to tell stories in 2 months. We've got feuds that have taken, sometimes 9 months, sometimes well over a year. You let them play out and really let the fans, get hooked on it and get emotional about it. You want to give them something to root for. Give them a good guy to root for and a bad guy to root for, and it's really simple. I don't like this gray matter that's coming out where the bad guys aren't really that bad anymore and the good guys, they're not really that good no more. I think you still need to have, especially on the indie scene, you need to have a bad guy and a good guy, and the good guy wins in the end, and that's what we generally, that's how I pattern our stuff off of.
Now, I've kind of caught up with some of your more recent stuff. You've got in your group here now, we've got Wade Hess and Derek and Cleaver, and they're going in as the Clan.
Yeah.
And I believe that's a reference to from the old Portland territory, if I'm not mistaken.
That's not a reference. That's blatant. Like, it gets no more blatant than that. I mean, it's not a reference, man. We flat out took it. So, it's an homage, you know, and it was really, you know, it's funny. Like, a lot of people, they buried it until they actually saw what happened, and a lot of people, they didn't really care for it. You know, like, oh, you're ripping them off. But all of a sudden now, it's like the most talked about and most searched thing that we've had in DOA this year. Like, it's our hot gimmick, and everybody's talking about it now. Like, the first week when they came out, everybody's like, oh, they ripped off this and it's unoriginal. I haven't heard anything. Nobody's saying nothing about it being unoriginal or it's ripped off after they've seen everything with their own eyes. Like, they're actually enjoying, you know, what's going on. So,
now, for someone like me, for someone like me who I didn't know much about the Portland territory, I'm learning a lot tonight, and I'm definitely going to start looking up some more. But what was the original storyline of the Klan back in, I guess, the 80s, 70s? Maybe you can kind of fill me in.
Wasn't it? It was Rip Oliver essentially creating his own group after when Buddy Rose started becoming more of a part-time wrestler. I think he started going to New York a lot more, and he was taking a lot of time off. And Rip wound up creating his own crew with the Assassin, and I think Ed Wiskowski was in it from time to time. And there was always that third person was always the filler, but Rip and the Assassin were the main nucleus.
One you have to include is the Dynamite Kid.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that led to the big Buddy Rose babyface turn as he came back from New York, and Rip's like, hey, buddy, this is our territory now. You know, you've been gone, we're taking over, and it was Rip, Assassin, and Dynamite, and they turned on Buddy, and Buddy always was famous for having his army, Buddy Rose Army. You know, he had a bunch of different members, and Rip kind of just formed his own crew, started the Klan, and, you know, Jason is winning. Ran with it.
So we're coming to a close here on our show. We only unfortunately get a couple hours. I'm sure a lot of the people out there listening would love to hear more of this. But I'm just gonna ask this question, and we'll go to each one of you. And the question is, in your opinion, what was the best or the greatest moment in the Portland wrestling history? And we'll start with, I'm going to go with Joe.
The greatest moment in Portland wrestling, as personally watching it, or just general, in my opinion, the most
in your opinion, and the rest of the panel's opinion, the greatest moment in the history.
Wow.
Or one of the biggest moments.
The biggest moment in my memory, just kind of close my eyes and just visualizing it, was Buddy Rose's babyface turn. When you have the ring literally full of fans that were in the sports arena carrying Buddy Rose on their shoulders, bloodied all to high hell, and the crowd was going crazy. That was just, it was just one of those time stood still moments, and that one has to sit there with me as one of the top moments. Yeah.
We'll go to Matt.
You cut out there a little bit. What did you say, Mike?
I'm asking the question to you. What, in your opinion, was the biggest moment in the Portland history?
For me personally, it was Buddy Rose's babyface turn, too, just because I was at that age. I was probably 10 years old at the time, and it just struck a chord with me. I'd already been a big mark for Buddy as a heel. So when your favorite's a heel and he turns to a babyface, as a kid, you love him that much more. And that really struck out to me. I think the biggest moment in the territory's history was probably Don's 60th anniversary, or the first time he sold out or came close to selling out the Coliseum back in 1968 with Lonnie Main and Tony Bourne. That period in the 60s is kind of a forgotten period of time, but the territory was immensely popular from Portland to Vancouver in the 60s. There was no other point in time when wrestling in the Northwest was hotter than during that time.
Jason, what's your moment?
There's a couple of moments. The Coliseum show, the 60th anniversary, which I was at, 12,000 people selling out the Coliseum was really cool, and it was kind of like the last great stand. They had other Coliseum shows after that, but that was like the last great, the last great show, the last great event, the last great time. Personally, I think, I think it was the payoff, the culmination of Buddy and Roddy in their feud, where they actually had 2 loser leave town matches from a Saturday to Tuesday. I thought that was incredible. Or was it Tuesday to Saturday? Either way, where they went 60 freaking full minutes, and they were able to drag every single one of those fans back into that building 5 days later and sell it out, and nobody complained because of the way it was set up. I think it was a great payoff for a great feud.
Definitely.
And Mike, the question goes to you.
Well, those are the ones I would come to mind as the Buddy babyface turn, the 60th anniversary. But the one thing that I'll say that it's definitely not the greatest moment, but it's one of the most memorable moments, was anytime Lonnie Main would come back to the Northwest after he had been gone. It was like, it's like the crowd just absolutely loved him. And he would come in and he'd kiss Frank Donovan and he'd kiss Shag Thomas and he'd kiss his opponent, and he would always put on the that he was just so happy to be back in Portland, and the crowd just reciprocated that so much.
Yeah,
all right.
Lonnie Main was probably the most over babyface in Portland's history.
I'm looking on our.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I would agree over a time. I think Piper was cool that short period of time that he was here. I think the people really loved him, but Lonnie sustained it for a longer time.
Yeah.
I just remember the loudest pop I ever heard was when that Piper came out for that 6-man tag with, I think it was Roddy, Buddy, and was it Axe Slayer against the Clan? And he came out, man, and that place just erupted. Like, I've never heard nothing that loud in my life.
Oh, especially if it's that St. Patrick's Day card where Don Owen...
That's the one.
Where Don Owen made the announcement that Piper injured his thumb and he had to get 20 stitches by the doctor in New York. And now I have the show, and watching it, listening to Stan Stasiak do the call, now this is quoting Stan, and I just kind of sat there, what? But, it is what it is. He sustained the injury in a match against Tony Rocca at the Olympic Auditorium.
Well, it was a rib, I think, because I think he sustained his injury changing a tire.
So I heard that. I was like, yeah, I got to do a bit of a rib. But the crowd was just so, they were mesmerized. That's the word. They were just so mesmerized by the whole thing, especially, in the Crow's Nest. When it made its way from the ring to the Crow's Nest, Piper came in, and they agreed to form their own army to go after the Klan. It was just so intense.
Now imagine if they had TV back in the 60s and 70s to capture the moments that like Lonnie Main and Dutch Savage and Jimmy Snuka made, and would we be talking about that, or were we talking about the 70s and 60s of Tony Bourne and everybody? I mean, because you're still able to go back and use that as reference notes.
Yeah. Yeah, the from the historian's point of view, everybody from the 60s, their big moment was when Lonnie Main and Tony Borne broke up.
Right.
You know, and or when they feuded. I wasn't around during that time, but during their feud, that had to have been magical too.
Definitely. And there was one point where Maurice Vachon came into the area. Tony Borne brought him in, and he was feuding with Lonnie Main. It was just magic.
A lot of people I've talked to that follow the wrestling, history and what have you, comparing the Lonnie Tony feud to the feud that Pat Patterson and Ray Stevens had in San Francisco when they broke up when they broke up as a tag team, and then when Pat came back expecting to team up with Ray, but Ray was a babyface, and then all what broke loose, and just blood spilled everywhere they went, kind of like along the same lines that Lonnie and Tony did.
And on that note, guys, on this note, I'd like to thank you for joining me here tonight on IHWE Radio. I hope our listeners enjoyed this little look at Portland wrestling history, and maybe one night we can all sit down and talk a little bit more about this, but thank you for joining me tonight, and I hope you enjoyed yourselves on the show.
Thanks, guys.
I had a wonderful time. Thank you so much. It was a blast. Thank you, guys.
Yep.
All right, everyone. You were listening to a little bit of Portland wrestling history right here on IHWE Radio tonight. Next week, we will be back with my co-host, David Fuller. We will be discussing, we will be hosting a tribute to a man we lost just a few short weeks ago, the Ultimate Warrior. We will be joined by Billy Anderson, who was one of the trainers for Warrior and Sting as well, and we will also be joined by artist Rob Schamberger. He is the man who painted the jacket that we all saw Warrior wear in the ring on Monday Night Raw. They struck up a friendship and all that, and he's agreed to come on to this show and talk about his experiences with the Warrior. May 21st, we will be joined by the Louisville Lip himself, Mr. James E. Cornett. He's going to be on here for an hour, and I'm sure that is going to be one awesome interview. May 28th, as I said last week, we are leading up to our all-CAC episode. Carl Lauer, Morgan Dollar, Jason Sanderson, Eric Schmiel, and other guests will be joining us as we discuss the last-minute news and happenings leading up to the 49th annual Cauliflower Alley Club reunion in Las Vegas, Nevada, where I will be hosting, along with David, a two-night back-to-back simulcast live from the reunion at a special airtime, 6 p.m. Central Standard Time, 4 p.m. Pacific. We are going to be joined by many guests, honorees, and a few surprises. It's going to be a great show. And I'd also like to make an announcement that this morning I signed the deal. We made the deal. June 18th will be the birth date of a legend in this sport, a man whose name still is known today. That man would be Bruiser Brody. His birthday would have been June 18th. And on that night, we will be joined by Bruiser Brody's wife, Barbara Goodish, will be joining us on the show that night. That is going to be a great interview. We will be joined by Matt Farmer as well that night. We're going to celebrate the career and the history of the late, great Bruiser Brody that night. So on behalf of Joe Souza, Matt Farmer, Mike Rogers, and Jason Sullivan, my panel tonight, I would like to wish you all well. You can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/Encyclopedia World Class. I am on Twitter at EncycloWCCW. And next week, 8 p.m. Central Standard Time, 6 p.m. Pacific here on the west coast of California, I will be live once again with my co-host David Fuller on IHWE Radio. Thank you for joining us, and good night.